The next panel discussion will see Dr. Himanta Biswa Sarma, Minister for Education, Health and Finance, Government of Assam. Shri Haseeb Drabu, former Government of India employee and journalist who served as the Finance Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. And Madam Latha Venkatesh, Executive Editor, CNBC TV 18 News. Shri Haseeb Drabu ji and Madam Latha Venkatesh have already occupied their seats on the dais. Very soon we'll be joined by Dr. Himanta Biswa Sarma. It will be very nice to see you all settled in your seats. A quick introduction of all the dignitaries on the dais. Dr. Himanta Biswa Sarma, Minister for Education, Health and Finance in the Government of Assam. A seasoned politician, the BJP leadership appointed him as the convener of the Northeast Democratic Alliance, the NEDA, which was constituted with the objective of all-round development of the Northeast and better coordination among the states and centre. He has played a key role in the implementation of GST. A warm welcome to you, Dr. Sarma, once again. Ladies and gentlemen, we also have Shri Haseeb Drabu, former Government of India employee and journalist who served as the Finance Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. He has worked with the Planning Commission of India, the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister, Business Standard, Asian Development Bank and the like. He was also Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Jammu and Kashmir Bank, received an MPhil in Economics from the Centre for Development Studies, Trivandrum. Welcome to you, sir. And we have Madam Latha Venkatesh, Executive Editor, CNBC TV 18 News. So I request you, ma'am, for the opening remarks and also to take charge of the session thereafter. Over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, we were just witness to an extremely erudite expounding of what are the duties of the Finance Commission with respect to sharing the resources between centre and states. It was important that Dr. Singh continued to say sharing of resources. It is not centre paying the state. These are joint resources which are shared rightfully between the states and between the centre and the states. The key takeaways, just quickly, because we want Mr. Sarma and Mr. Drabu's reactions to it. The key takeaways from Dr. Singh was that one of the primary and persistent and continuous themes that the Finance Commission has to grapple with while sharing resources is how much to give for equity and how much to reward efficiency. Previous Finance Commissions, of course, have given a lot of weightage to equity. The other point that he made is that, which is contentious, and that's why I'm bringing it up, Mr. Sharma, is that the terms of reference have asked the Finance Commission to look at the 2011 census. But as he points out, it doesn't debar him from looking at previous census. It only asks him to look at the 2011 census, a very important takeaway for those who have been sparring over that point as a term of reference. And then, of course, what happens to centrally sponsored schemes? We already have Manrega and Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, two huge schemes. And then finally, now you also have the Ayushman scheme. This kind of disturbs the division of powers under the 7th schedule in the union list, the central list, the state list and the concurrent list. And therefore, how should the Finance Commission handle the centrally sponsored schemes? That will perennially remain messy and something which the Finance Commission will have to handle. Every Finance Commission will have to handle. These were the key takeaways from what Dr. Singh had to say. So let me straight away start this as a continuation of how the states are responding to what the Finance Commission has said. Haseeb Drabu, to you first. What would you want the Finance Commission to do as someone who has shepherded a state until recently? I think you can start speaking straight.
Hi. Let me kind of put it in one line, what my expectation is, and then perhaps discuss some of the things that Mr. Singh said. A very old scholar, S. Guhan, once said, and I was saying that they are very, it's fine. S. Guhan once very famously said, a finance commission is a dog that bites the states and barks at the center. Now, I just hope and pray that this finance commission does the opposite. I think we need to understand today's discussion in the context of yesterday's discussion. We are looking at new economy or new India, where yesterday the focus was on how states drive the economic growth now. It's in that context that we must understand the role of Finance Commission, but I think move also beyond Finance Commission. Center-state relations or center-state finances are not restricted only to Finance Commission. Finance Commission sets the framework. If you look at constitutionally speaking, and there's nothing that one can disagree with what Mr. Singh said, because, and he, being a very seasoned bureaucrat, kept all his cards to himself and gave us a wonderful exposition of the complexity of his task, which understandably so, and in many ways, the general public understanding of Finance Commission is not as intense as it ought to have been, and he's making an effort to make sure that they understand. Constitutionally speaking, India is a union of states. But I think the way I would want to see the new economy, that's a federation of economies. We should stop seeing India as one economy. And this I'm saying from the perspective of businesses particularly. Don't see India as one large economy. India is 30 economies with 30 levels of skill endowments, resource endowments, and so on and so forth. And the center-state relations should now provide a framework for these 30 economies to work in tandem and bring in investments and growths and various things that were discussed just now. Because the first phase, the macroeconomic story, basic policy regime is in place. We now need to look at the action at the state levels. And the center-state framework needs to change to that, and I'll go further on.
I had no intention to interrupt, actually. I wanted you to have your say on the Finance Commission. But to say that we are 30 economies, is in this group of businessmen, I don't think anybody will agree. I don't think anyone can run any business within his state. Everybody will admit that their economy is India. I doubt, sir, there are 30 economies.
No, what I'm saying is see it as 30 economies with endowments and with positions and whatever, and policy regimes. The point I'm trying to make is states must have powers to policy flexibility. If they have to move from coercive federalism to cooperative federalism to competitive federalism. All I'm saying is that the institutions of federalism in India have evolved in response to a particular regime, which was of a closed economy, a controlled economy. We are now an open economy, a regulated economy. Nothing has changed. Earlier, private investment was driving growth, public investment was driving growth, and was used as a way for equalization. Today, it is private investment. Today, markets matter, natural resources matter. None of this is coming in the ambit of the center-state relations. We need to move to the next level. Today, I think we should move, its time has come, to move from a tax-sharing federalism to a resource-sharing federalism. India has to move from a union to a federation, stop short of being a confederation. I think that's where the design change has to come, and Finance Commission ought to drive it. Most interestingly, which Mr. Singh pointed out, we had a unconstitutional intruder in the federalism called Planning Commission, which was distortionary. The kind of things, that complexity that Mr. Singh was talking about, emanated from the Planning Commission, and we had this artificial between plan and non-plan, which has now got reversed. We are now looking at revenue and capital. So Finance Commission, 15th Finance Commission, very, very important role. We can come to terms of reference. I think that's really critical because that's been done. But there's enough statutory powers that the Finance Commission has to redesign, and that I think is the need to redesign the framework of federalism in India, fiscal federalism.
Are you saying that they have the ability to change from sharing of taxes to sharing of resources?
Of course, there's nothing in the Constitution that prevents him. He's a statutory body. Planning Commission was not a statutory body. The only other federal institution, which I think is more genuinely federal than Finance Commission, is the GST Council. They need to now work on, because they need to work in tandem and work it out. In the 10th Commission, I happen to be working with the 10th Commission, we changed the entire setup of sharing of taxes because the Finance Commission is free to recommend, and we suggested an alternative model of 29%. Earlier it was limited to may share, shall share. There were all kinds of complications. We just avoided all that and said, let's put together a number, give 29% to states. That has gone to 42 now. And that was given as an alternative devolution scheme. Nothing prevents Mr. Singh from recommending that this is what you want me to do as per Constitution. However, obiter dicta, alternative, new federal scheme, this is what I want to do. I recommend to you, take a call, and that is how policy changes happen. And he has managed policy changes in 91. I mean, I know the team that was there. You know it. We've covered it as journalists. So he has the capability in the authority to do that. So I think it's at a point of time when we need to seriously go beyond the TORs of population and stuff. We need to take a bigger picture. Times have changed. Economic regime has changed. India has changed. Policy making on federal finance has got stuck somewhere in the 50s. We need to re-examine the entire thing.
Okay. Well, I just want to add 2 points against what you're saying for future discussion. Haseeb, while you may say that there are 30 economies, the fact of the matter is that India and every other country is going towards a centralizing tendency. And whether we can reverse that historical trend is open to question. As well, resource sharing. I mean, how many states, chief ministers and finance ministers are going to agree with you? I don't think Punjab and Delhi are able to agree on water sharing of the Yamuna, which we always thought flows through Delhi. So whether everybody will agree to resource sharing would be open to political question. But I'm coming to that in a minute. Let me get Dr. Biswa in, Dr. Sharma in. Mr. Sharma, your first reactions, I summarized to you what Dr. Singh said. What are your expectations from the Finance Commission?
No, I think Mr. Singh was in Assam yesterday, and we traveled together from Guwahati to Mumbai. We had almost 2 hours discussion on the Finance Commission. But the things is not easy, and I mean, it is not about just sharing resources, how much you will evolve, devolve. It is not that easy. First of all, the relationship between center and state on political front, now it is clear and there is no scope of interpretation, because you know what is the political power of a state, what is the political power of center. But economic relationship is still evolving. You have Schedule 7, List 1, List 2, List 3 is there. Now, health is a subject which falls within the state. Now, Karnataka is capable of launching a similar scheme like Ayushman Bharat, and the individual of Karnataka can access health insurance cover. Now, can state of Nagaland launch a health insurance scheme of that magnitude without center support? Now, the question is, we are talking state as a unit. Now, come to individual. A individual taxpayer of Nagaland or Assam, he is also paying the same amount which now Finance Commission is going to distribute. Now, a taxpayer from Karnataka is also paying the same amount which Finance Commission will distribute. Now, why inequality in their life? If people of Karnataka can access Ayushman Bharat, why Assam people will not access? Because I am paying same tax. Geographical boundary doesn't matter. I am living in the same country. So, don't you think that even in the state list, you need centrally sector scheme? Without PMGSY, will the state in northeastern region, Uttarakhand, would have at any point of time, would have access to a all-weather road? Probably answer is no. So it's very hard task, difficult task, and I believe that in India, relationship between state and center, List 1, List 2, List 3, all these needs a relook. For the first time, you have a Prime Minister who has worked as a Chief Minister of a state. Although we have Mr. Devagowda, but his position in PM was brief. But Mr. Modi has worked as a chief minister for a fairly long time, and we understand, we are confident that he will work as a prime minister for a fairly long time. So this is the time, I mean, there is a prime minister who knows the requirement of a state, who understands now requirement of a country, because although securing country, defense, army, it looks like a mandate of a central government, but if you don't secure country, then how a state will prosper, how Jammu Kashmir can prosper if there is no army. So, or there is somebody who is securing sovereignty of the country. So this is a very critical function. You need to approach it from very practical point of view, and I hope Mr. Singh is capable of doing that. But while I emphasize on this point that this is a very critical thing to do, but at the same time we must also see that states are not being deprived from their genuine resources. I'll come back to 14th Finance Commission. Now, 14th Finance Commission on paper, they have done a very good work for the states. It is believed to be so. But we have presented the facts before 15th Finance Commission day before yesterday that it was not like that. Because you have devolved us 42%, but you have shifted many central sector schemes to the state. And only day before yesterday, central government has said that your teachers whom you have appointed in compliance to right to education, henceforth will pay only 15,000. So earlier they were paying full. Now they said that we will pay only 15,000. Now result is state like Assam, my additional burden is 450 crore will be for these years. This is exactly the amount which the 10% fiscal space is going to be, or it is mean for us. So I think this Finance Commission has to keep certain things very clear. What is the central sector scheme? Whether central government is allowed to change the goalpost in between. Now, if we are sharing the resource, now whether there will be common kitty where state will also contribute to the defense of the country. So there are certain things which this Finance Commission will have to address, and I am sure that in GST we have shown the wisdom that when center and state can work together, we can produce some result which nobody was expecting. So I believe that Finance Commission should not only visit the state, the interaction should continue, and at some point of time, center and state should come face to face. I mean, it should not be like a Supreme Court judge that you hear both sides and then you announce a judgment. You should have your continuous interaction. At some point of time, bring Central Finance Department and State Finance face to face, discuss this issue, and try to actually create a new India where there will be no confrontation, no conflict between state and center, and it will be, the essence will be a cooperative federalism. Okay. And I have full faith on the new Finance Commission. We have just had GST in that spirit, and I think this Finance Commission will also perform in the spirit of the cooperative federalism which we have just seen in evolution of GST.
Okay, well, there are two common themes between both of you. Both of you recognize that an important federal institution has been created, the GST Council, and the Finance Commission will have to interact with it or take cognizance of that reality. And the other thing, of course, both of you are speaking about cooperative federalism. But, you know, since you spoke at length about the change in the 14th Finance Commission from 32% going to states to 42%, are you objecting to it? What if the formula were reversed or changed? What would you react? I mean, you don't seem to be happy with 42.
No, Latha, again, India is a diverse state. Northeastern region will be very happy if you introduce normal central assistant, which you are there. If you reintroduce SPA, Central Plan Assistant, which you are there in some form, and if you don't, whatever goalposts you have changed during this period post-Finance Commission, I will be very happy to go back to 32% because my devolution in actual terms is not very impressive from 32 to 42. But
has it increased at all or has it fallen?
I mean, if I have to say that it is increased in a very moderate way. But now, the case will, Karnataka and Bengal will not be same because they were not enjoying 90-10. So 32 to 42% is a wholesome gain for some state, and for some state it is a moderate gain. So you have to appreciate the final facts that India is 30 state is not one unit. 30 economy or whatever, but it is not one unit. You have a 5 sons, all are not equally competent. Somebody is doing fairly good in education, somebody is not doing good. So you have to have a a la carte menu. You can't have a buffet all the time. That this is the buffet, this is the menu.
Okay.
So you have to make that positive discrimination and you have to see case by case. So impression in Delhi and Bombay, no, we have made 32 to 42. So that may not bring joy to everybody. So you have to go
measure
into detail.
Okay.
So that is my point.
Okay. Well, I think Haseeb wants to add something to it. You were nodding vigorously.
No, I think that,
Mike.
Look, sorry. I don't think one needs to get into the nitty-gritty of 32, 42. What was the basic intent of 14th Commission? I think we need to look at some basic design issues. We have a messy transfer of resources today. Messy. You do revenue sharing. Then, for a variety of political reasons, we got into expenditure underwriting, which is where the actual problem came up, which is CSSs came in, ministries started to get in, gross budgetary support came in. It became messy, and there was a point in time when Uttar Pradesh would get 47% of the total CSS kitty. All right? So there were issues, I mean, in 1974 onwards, they have been rationalized and whatever. The brilliance of the 14th Commission thing was simple-mindedness. Let me forget the expenditure underwriting. Let me just focus on the revenue sharing. In which case, Himanta would not have lost. I also come from the same state, a special category state. Only 2 special category states in India exist, Assam and J&K. They happen to be sitting here. Assam then subsequently broke into 7 and, we had 8 now. Now, once this expenditure underwriting thing goes away, that is where the problem arose.
But
because for a variety. Now, that is what the understanding was, that the expenditure underwriting will go down. So when Himanta says resources were not increased, the total aggregate vertical was 61%. It remained at 61%. But where I am very happy I was and happy as a policy maker was, I knew exactly what my revenues will be. There was certainty. It was transparent in devolution form. So revenue sharing was there. And there are criteria. Then you will have discussions on criteria. You can blend population. You can do income distance. You can do whatever. All that is fine. What I am today arguing for is, apart from all this, please recognize that now it's not in India which is driven by public investment. Now, and when I said in resources, you're talking of as if Chief Minister will be unhappy. Here is a resource-rich state, and mine is his is oil, mine is hydro. What does he get out of oil? What do I get out of hydro? I get nothing out of it. Today, 90% of NHPC's profits come from J&K waters. What does JK get out of it? Nothing. Center usurps all these monies through these PSUs, central PSUs, whether it is ONGC, IOC, and whatever. Dividends come to them, shares are sold and money is made. So this in this time now you start looking at that resource. Royalties not revised for more than 4 times in 70 years. Why not? What happened to that? Why can't you index it? And what this has resulted in something which I think is a very, very serious political economy issue, which needs to be addressed. And I'm so happy that Mr. Singh is here. While you are liberalizing India, every state is becoming protectionist. Orissa says, you mine ore, you put 40-50% back in here. Assam has its own issues. Goa has its own issues. Kashmir is having its own issues. So with a larger economy of liberalization, which is open to the world, you are now building protectionist barriers in every single state. Now, you need to recognize that if states have to grow, this is my original point I was trying to make to you, give them enough elbow room and flexibility. Do you realize that today, as we speak, Companies and individuals have more rights to access external markets than state governments? Why? Borrowing...
because you are not a good credit.
No. So let them find that for themselves. There was this big myth that states should not borrow in the markets till recently when states were liberalized. Now what is happening? No crisis has come. Market rates them. You get triple-B states, you get junk states. So where is the problem? If the macroeconomic risk of forex is there, it is for companies, so is it for states. Why have you restricted them? So the point I'm trying to make, if new economy, new India has to emerge, it has to emerge in the states, give them responsibility, create an institutional structure. GST is a wonderful structure. I kept saying this throughout that first genuinely federal institution was GST. We were spending half an hour discussion on Manipur dried fish.
Okay.
You know, and for the first time I felt very empowered as a finance minister when I was there, that the union finance minister would call us in a video conference and say, should I raise the rates or not? I remember 1991, Mr. Singh was sitting here. All finance ministers of states must have read in the newspapers that the nature of economic regime has changed. Was anybody consulted? Manmohan Singh, who was the finance minister, didn't consult anybody, apart maybe from his cabinet colleagues. I doubt even that.
Okay.
Now here you are now getting into states, looking at various complexities. I had my views, he had his views, and we arrived at a golden mean. Now that's the kind of thing you need for policy-making purposes. Okay. How it emerges subsequently is something that, as we go along, we can figure out.
Well, quite incidentally,
I'll just supplement Mr. Drabu. In GST Council, if you see that all the state finance ministers are happy, you interacting with everybody, nobody raise any voice of dissent, because that was based on justice and equity. We have a clear roadmap. Now, surcharge will be discharged to pay compensation to the state. Now, once compensation regime is over, what we will do with surcharge? Even that framework is also in place. Now, while we start discussing on issue, now I know many things about Jammu Kashmir and I know many things about Uttarakhand, vice versa. They started appreciating each other points. Yes. On lottery, we accommodate Kerala. On tea, they accommodate Assam.
Yes.
So I think Finance Commission has to, at some point of time, evolve like a genuine, if you cannot adopt that as a institution, but you need to go towards that kind of consultation mechanism where both center and state, both will come as a victorious.
As equals.
Both will be victorious. On GST, whatever our political affiliation might be, but we are with Arun Jaitley, we are with Prime Minister, whether I am from Congress or BJP. You will see no Congress Finance Minister accused GST Council, no BJP Finance Minister or Regional Party Finance Minister. Because of the very genuineness, the basis was justice and equity. I think with leaders like Mr. N.K. Singh and Prime Minister like Mr. Modi, even Finance Commission dispensation can also be transformed to that level, and India will be able to resolve many issues which is pending between center and state.
Actually, you know, I must say the organizers perhaps should not have put Mr. Singh and the finance ministers one after the other, but together. I think there is a missing seat over here. May I request a mic to be brought to Dr. Singh, just so that you respond to the two issues that both the gentlemen have raised. I would very much request. Sir, I mean, there are two things that they have raised, and very important issues. One, what will be your level of engagement with the GST Council, where a certain, I mean, it's an institution you cannot ignore. Unlike the Rajya Sabha, it is not represented indirectly, and it is not represented according to population. It is one state, one vote, and there is the center which has moved through consensus. So it is an institution you cannot bypass, and both of them have asked you to, deal with, to converse with the GST Council. What would be your reaction to that? And then I'll come to the second question that they have raised. Dr. Singh?
Yeah, actually I was not prepared for this Q&A.
For this suggestion from the ministers?
From Q&A, because anyway, one of the terms of reference of the Finance Commission directly relates to the GST. And therefore, in addressing that, as we go along. We believe that if an engagement with the GST Council would be purposeful in that direction, that's something which the Commission would certainly wish to consider. But going beyond that, I think I wish to react to the suggestion made both by my good friend Haseeb and by Mr. Sarma, that consultation process with all stakeholders and the idea of bringing all parties together in some kind of a format, that's a very creative, innovative suggestion. And we would want to look at that in a certain way. And I think that the point made by Haseeb is very valid, that we need to look beyond this issue of resources, this issue of revenues, because private sector has come into play. They have a very, very important role to play. Public-private partnership has an exceedingly important role to play. And what kind of a framework would enable a consultative mechanism which brings the dimension of a new India, which goes beyond this business of, that's something which I think that is very
That was my second question, sir. The point raised by both of them, that they are resource-rich states. There is an NHPC and there is a ONGC, which takes charge of those resources and not so much the state governments. It's a radical suggestion, but basically, do you think the Finance Commission will be able to respond to sharing of not just taxes, but resources, or is that beyond the pale of what the Constitution allows you?
Well, I think that the Constitution doesn't inhibit us, and these are suggestions we will definitely value, and we'll look to these suggestions.
Well, I believe we don't have too much time, and this is a gathering of businessmen. I do not want to lose the opportunity. The state's finances are very important to businessmen as well, as are central finances. State investment in public goods, in public investment is as important to businessmen as is the centre's public investment, which drives capex. At the moment, a lot of businessmen want the central government to drive private capex. So, Mr. Zainul Bhai, on behalf of all the businesses over here, what would be your questions or comment to the state finance ministers? How would you want them to, businesses do not respect state boundaries, and yet they want the help of state finance ministers. Any additions you want to make, since the mic is so close to you? It's not anymore? Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought since it was there, it was easy to ask you to. Mr. Zainul Bhai. As a businessman, sir, how would you want states to be funded?
Just like my colleague, Dr. Singh, I wasn't quite prepared for this Q&A. I was prepared for the next panel. But having spent time in business in Bombay, I think two questions that I would have. One is, the state, the responsibilities of the state on many policies and infrastructure projects, as well as the responsibilities of the state for healthcare, education, and others, are of actually great importance to businessmen. When they're thinking of where to put their factories, their enterprises, their commercial activities, these issues are actually very important, and most of them are dealt with by the states. If you see the rise of certain cities that have occurred in India, it has been the responsibility of many of the states that have driven the growth of the cities, and businessmen will put their resources and their commercial enterprises where that happens. So I think the state play a very, very important role. Quite often, people would argue, to your point about how many economies are there in India, is a very interesting question. I would argue that from a business standpoint, it's not just that there are 30 states and therefore there are 30 economies. If you look at a lot of recent work that's been done, there are something like 40 or 50 clusters of cities that are really driving a lot of the economic activity in India. And those are somewhat independent of the state. Sometimes, of course, they are co-centric with the state. So it is very important, not just the role of the state finances, but actually the role of the city finances, where a lot of economic activity is being done. So I would just encourage you to not just look at the state and center finances, but also within it to put in finances for the cities who are now able to raise money independently, right? And they're starting to do that. And so that those finances also become very, very important. Okay. Thank you.
Well, you want to respond to that?
Not really, but I mean, I was talking of it from the perspective of policy making. So it's from that perspective because you have two levels of policies. The macroeconomic policy more or less has been aligned and done with. You need now infrastructure and stuff like that. As regards expenditure, the fact is that states, you need not look at the capex because what really matters for states is revenue expenditure. Unfortunately, gets classified with health, education, all of it revenue expenditure. So the quality of expenditure needs to be looked at differently when a businessman is looking at a state economy. So because our traditional fiscal economist mindset is capex is good, revenue expenditure is bad. Fact of the matter is revenue expenditure in states is teachers, doctors, nurses, and policemen. So that's where you need to kind of look at the whole thing differently. Having said that, I just want to kind of wind up with, because once Latha is there, you'll transform everything into a question answer. She needs one news bite. That's what she wanted Mr. Singh to speak about. The challenge really, Mr. Singh, is can you empower states without disempowering the center in going forward? And there has to be a creative way. And I think you will need some change in the architecture to be able to do that. That's all I...
You can even tell him that.
No, so that's why I think how...
What is the change?
No, so that I'm sure is a little more complicated than having said it. But essentially, the point is that you can't have a weak center and strong states. Basic principles. Yet you need to empower states without disempowering the center. How do you do that? The balance of powers. We are not a confederation. At best, a federation. Let's understand that. Politics will fall in line. I think politics has evolved over the years. Political federalism has evolved. You have a chief minister who became a prime minister first time. And now it looks like the chief minister are going to decide who the prime minister will be. That's the political part of it. On business and economic federalism, we haven't moved forward. That, I think, is the key.
Yeah, well, the Constitution itself doesn't even say we are a federation. It says we are a union of states. So that's another, realm altogether. Final thoughts, Mr. Sharma.
I think, I believe that this finance commission...
So his response that,
Yeah, I think it is very right because when we negotiate resource with center, the like city government resource negotiated with state. Now, smart city companies are important innovation where they can raise fund and they can actually empower themselves with the support of both center and state governments. But my only hope that the way in political relation things are defined between center and state now. You know when Article 356 can be imposed, where it is not, when you can interfere. That political relationship is very, very defined. Now it is a time for a stable country and for further economic growth. The economic relationship between center and state should be defined. It should be just, fair to both center and state.
Okay, finally, I mean, if I can take one more minute only, what was your comment to the other suggestions in the Finance Commission's terms of reference? Would you like the Finance Commission to judge you on how populist your schemes are?
No, I think these are question marks. Till other day, we launched Atal Amrit Abhijan. This was a health assurance scheme. In DGs, every individual is entitled for 2 lakhs cashless treatment. Till Ayushman Bharat comes in, probably some central government would have said that this is a populist measure. Now, definition of populist measure itself is to be defined by somebody. Now, health and education, whether it's doctor, payment of a salary on a doctor, whether it is a revenue expenditure or capital expenditure.
Or a populist expenditure.
Populistic measure. So, many things is to be defined. And I am of the opinion that with Mr. Modi as Prime Minister who served in the state and now Prime Minister, Mr. N.K. Singh, who is theoretician, as well as he deal the things from practical point of view, I think we can see a paradigm shift in this Finance Commission recommendation.
All right. Well, we have to call it a day because we've been told to wind up before 1 o'clock. I just wanted to add a last point, a book I read when I was preparing for this panel, a book of letters written by Jawaharlal Nehru to his chief ministers. By one Mr. Khosla. I couldn't finish, I could only browse through it. But it is important that Prime Minister Nehru actually wrote a letter every year or in some periodicity informing or considering himself accountable to the chief ministers and saying that I did this, I have had a relation with this on defense matters. He is actually holding himself accountable not just to the country, but to his chief ministers and explaining to them why he took a certain international stance. So, Federation also has that accountability of prime ministers to chief ministers, that's also one of the traditions of India. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. I think the two finance ministers, one former and now, deserve a very big round of applause. Thank you.
Please stay back for a minute with us. Would request Shri Binod Bauriji, Shri Chandravadvaji, Director, India Foundation, to please present mementos to all the dignitaries on the dais for such a thoroughly engaging discussion. Beginning with Dr. Himanta Biswa Sarma, all right, Shri Haseeb Ahmad Drabu, and mementos for Dr. Himanta Biswa Sarma. And tokens of appreciation and gratitude for Madam Latha Venkatesh. Please accept this on our behalf. One group picture, please. No, we have another discussion to, okay. One group, quick picture. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we begin the next session immediately after this.